There's a lot to get to. Let's get to it. First, Danielle Smith says, Alberta wins again. Federal court says liberal plastic ban both unreasonable and unconstitutional. Thank goodness. My full statement with the Minister of Environment and Protected Areas, Rebecca Schultz. She says, a little over a year ago, Alberta intervened with the federal court to argue that the federal government's decision to unilaterally label plastics as a toxic substance is an unconstitutional intrusion into provincial jurisdiction and a threat to our economy. Today, the federal court sided with Alberta and Saskatchewan and found that listing plastics as a toxic substance is both unreasonable and unconstitutional. I was watching Oliver Twist. Oliver Twist is set in the 1800s, I think, early turn of the century type deal. Before the Second World War, plastics weren't used, so things were transported in barrels and things like that. Oliver jumps onto a truck heading into the city with the food from the farm, and he gets to the bottom of a lettuce barrel. And I thought to myself, gross. You got to wrap those things up, man, in toxic plastic. It's really crazy. And I mean, like when you look at the benefits of plastic, and these radical people have convinced themselves that plastics are toxic and bad, and we need to remove them from whatever to save ourselves, and ignore the negative side effects of not having plastic, meaning like food is just kind of out, and like that's not great, right? That for health purposes, there's a lot of benefits to having the food wrappings that we have now, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So it's really, really interesting that this took this long, and two, these radicals are being put in their place, which is good, but I really had lost any kind of faith in the courts. Back to this. The court also found that the federal government's decision to label all plastics as toxic poses a threat to the balance of federalism, as it does not restrict the regulation to only those plastics that truly have the potential to cause harm to the environment. The court also reminded the federal government that cooperative federalism recognizes that the provincial government and the federal government are coordinate. The provinces are not subordinate to the federal government. A federal head of power cannot be given a scope that would eviscerate a provincial legislative competence. This latest decision comes on the heels of the Supreme Court of Canada's decision confirming the unconstitutionality of the federal government's Destructive Impact Assessment Act, formerly known as Bill C-69, and demonstrates a continued pattern of federal overreach intended to subvert the constitutionally protected role and rights of provinces using the criminal head of power. Like Bill C-69, the federal government's decision to unilaterally label perfectly safe plastic consumer products as toxic has had wide-ranging consequences for Alberta's economic interests and has put thousands of jobs and billions of investments at risk. Alberta is proudly home to Canada's largest petrochemical sector, a sector with more than $18 billion in recently announced projects that were needlessly put in jeopardy by virtue signaling federal government with no respect for the division of power outlined in the Canadian Constitution. It's time for the federal government to listen to the courts and Canadians. We urge them to not appeal this decision and to immediately delete the plastic manufactured items from Schedule 1 of the current Canadian Environmental Protection Act so as to avoid further need of legal action by Alberta and other provinces. So they lost. Gelbo lost, and he has to pay Ezra Levant $20,000, and he hasn't paid Ezra Levant $20,000 yet either. And that's not great. Like, that's not good news. Anyway, Michael Tomlinson says, 3 losses in a row for Gelbo against Ezra. 2, the Supreme Court ruling against No More Pipelines law, that's C-69, and 3, the federal court ruling against the plastics ban order in council. Our criminal environment minister doesn't respect the rule of law. 3 strikes, he's out. Fingers crossed, maybe. We'll see. Global News is reporting the court's decision calls Ottawa's ban on single-use plastic like straws and grocery bags both unreasonable and unconstitutional. Oh, I'm excited about grocery bags coming back. I always thought it was kind of hokey when I was a kid. I remember asking my dad, because I saw somebody walking across the street with grocery bags, and I could read, "Thank you for shopping." And I thought it was weird to say thank you for shopping. And my dad said, well, it's a nice thing for the owner to say thank you to his customers for trusting him, blah, 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 blah. And I didn't get it until I was much older. But those little kind of things, those little details do matter, right? They do. And I like having grocery bags that I can then use to line my boots for sledding. When I was a kid, oftentimes boots, for whatever reason, and they were terrible, awful boots. Anyway, they had liners in them. So you have to put the liner on your foot and then put the boot on. And then sometimes the liners would get wet anyway, or the liners were kind of destroyed and whatever. So you'd put a bag in the liner of the boot and then put the liner of the boot with your foot in it in the boot. But like the boot was, you couldn't put it all on together at one time. No way. That was crazy. But imagine kids these days, right? I guess they don't have snow, so it's a whole different thing. Here's Gelbo, and he says, he slips here though. Halfway through, he says $1 billion. Imagine $1 billion, and he's all satisfied, like he's satisfied saying like $1 billion. But he's just said that they've actioned $100 billion. I don't think that they've actioned $100 billion of climate anything. They may have flushed $100 billion down the toilet. They may have lit $100 billion on fire, uselessly doing lawsuits or whatever, banning plastics that aren't toxic, et cetera, but they haven't actioned $1 billion. Paul Mitchell says, Liberal Cabinet Minister Stephen Guilbeault announces the OECD countries have already wasted $100 billion on the CO2 climate change false narrative, and now our collective challenge is to mobilize $1 trillion more. It's also notable to me how he's not saying we have saved this much CO2 from going into the atmosphere. We have been able to avert these catastrophic environmental disasters that were on the horizon, that, you know, doing this concrete action averted, et cetera, et cetera. Now, I know why he's not doing that, because no stories like that exists. It's not a mystery to me why he's not highlighting the things that they've actually accomplished with this money, because they haven't accomplished anything. They've lit it on fire, flushed it down the toilet, or maybe shoved it up their nose. I'm not sure what, but one of those three, right? Or a combination thereof. But fundamentally, they have done nothing with this carbon tax to help the environment, period. Same as in British Columbia. You want a heat pump? Give me a break, right? Here is Stephen Guilbeault talking about actioning $100 billion, and then watch for the slip up. You'll see it. I don't think it's missable. I think he realizes it and then tries to correct. Here we go.
I was in Copenhagen. You were too, Jennifer, and you know, 100 billion sounded like so much money at the time, and we didn't know how, we had no idea how we would ever be able to mobilize it, and we've done it. Great. But there's so much more that needs to be done, and we know that, you know, the conversation needs to shift. Okay, well, we have mobilized $100 billion. How do we mobilize $1 billion, $1 trillion? I mean, 10 times what we have, 15 times what we have mobilized now. So that's what our collective challenge is. I was in,
but they haven't done anything. So self-satisfied, right? Here is Jennifer Wu, and she's talking about Bill C-69 as well. And these people they're celebrating this loss by the government because it's ridiculous. And this is just a walk back to October when CBC was reporting Supreme Court rules environmental impact legislation largely unconstitutional. That's C-69. So these losers keep losing because they're losers. Here is Ben, and he's an MP, and he says, 3 other premiers have joined the call to get my bill C-234 passed in the Senate. Thank you, Premier Danielle Smith of Alberta, Premier Scott Moe of Saskatchewan, and Premier Higgs of New Brunswick for the support. Call your senators, urge them to pass this bill for our farmers. This bill passed the House in February of 2023, and it's been languishing in the Senate since. Trudeau doesn't want it passed. He didn't want it passed in the House, and the opposition combined together to get it passed in the House. And so Guilbeault has been playing silly buggers. My mom used that term when I was growing up, silly buggers. I thought it was funny. He's playing silly buggers by going and having conversations with senators, and then the senators, in a shock move, adjourned debate about the bill on the last time the Senate was together. And now the next time they get together, I think it's the 21st, but I could be wrong on that, but I think it's the 21st. They're going to bring up Bill C-234. So there's a pressure campaign going on to pressure the people, the senators, to pass this bill. Will they, right? Who's got the better pressure campaign machine? Is it Poilievre? Because Poilievre's asked people to put pressure on this. And all of the premiers, and I'll show you some more right now, Doug Ford, all of the premiers, a whole bunch of the premiers, Doug Ford and the Nova Scotia premier included, and as well as the ones I just mentioned, are sending letters to anybody they need to, the senators in their province, to encourage them to pass this bill. The Senate doesn't work for us, right? Will the Senate listen to these premiers? I'm not sure. Here's Ben again. He says, thank you, both Premier Houston of Nova Scotia and Premier Ford of Ontario, for the support of my bill C-234 to take the carbon tax off of farm propane and natural gas. See their letters below. So that's interesting as well. Here's Paul Mitchell again, and he says, Saskatchewan introduces bill to scrap the carbon tax on natural gas. Let's go Saskatchewan. So when Ottawa said to all the provinces, we're going to, take off the carbon tax for Atlantic Canadians on heating oil. Excuse me. We're going to take off the carbon tax on heating oil across the country, but that mainly benefits the place in Eastern Canada, Atlantic provinces, where heating oil is mostly used. And importantly for Trudeau, he gets a lot of support. He gets a lot of seats in the House of Commons, right? There's 34 seats across those provinces from Labrador, Newfoundland to Nova Scotia and New Brunswick, right? So there's a lot of seats there. And if Trudeau did nothing, he would have lost those seats already, right? We would see an electoral map over 220 seats for Mr. Poilievre. So that's interesting to note, okay? So Trudeau responded to that electoral threat by making life more affordable for people by removing this idiotic carbon tax. But he's saying, we're going to give people time to buy heat pumps. But I thought that the carbon tax made things, you got more back than people put in. So how could that be, right? How could they possibly say these two things are true? Because they're not. They can't be. So it's very, very interesting. And so Saskatchewan's upset about other provinces having preference over Saskatchewan, who doesn't use oil and gas, who doesn't use oil heat, right? To heat their homes, they only use natural gas. And so because they only use natural gas, or mostly use natural gas, they were excluded from this, and Scott Moe is fixing that for his citizens. And I think that's really good for him. I don't know if it's going to work out, because they're going to say this is a dangerous game. They're going to say he's breaking the rule of law. He's floating the rule of law. He's doing all sorts of stuff. They're going to do everything they can to undermine this. And I haven't heard anything yet, because I guess they haven't decided on their strategy, if they're going to say he's a criminal or if they're going to say he doesn't have a climate change plan, because the criminal thing might work. Saying he doesn't have a climate change plan, he's going to turn that back on them and say, well, I'm following your plan. Actually, you just erased the carbon tax on Eastern Canada. So, right? Like, what's your plan? Heat pumps? Yeah, sure, Christia. Have another Twitch. But it's a very interesting situation, because we haven't seen the response yet really from the federal government, other than to imply maybe kind of sort of that he needs to respect the rule of law and the law as it stands. But the federal government doesn't, right? C69, plastic straws, ordering council to ban any guns Justin Trudeau doesn't like the look of. They don't respect the law as written. They have this idea of what the law says, a spirit of the law that doesn't include any kind of accountability. Remember when they said safe and effective? Who's been held accountable for those lies? Anybody? No. Not one person, right? It's pretty wild. I haven't watched this yet. Jesse Waters says climate change is a pyramid scheme. The media, politicians, and academics are at the top, and all of us taxpayers are at the bottom. It's only a minute long. I haven't watched this yet, but here we go.
So it is a pyramid scheme, climate change. If you think about it, you have the media, the politicians, and the academics at the top, and then at the bottom you have all of us, the taxpayers. So academics realized early on that the more papers that they put out saying that climate change was caused by humans and the world was going to blow up in 2 years if we don't do something about it, they were going to get more grant money from the politicians. And so the media takes these research papers and then they report them, and then they get big ratings because everybody gets scared and everybody gets nervous. And then the politicians scare the heck out of you and said, get rid of big oil, we need to go green. And then they throw all of our money around at all of their donors and all of their investors. So they're all making all this money by telling us something that's not happening. We had this big climate change whistleblower on last night who said she's been ostracized because she reported that maybe the earth is warming a little bit, but the human impact is really not much. And the fact that it's warming, we got this. It's not Armageddon. And she has been smeared as a denier, and all of her grants dried up. And no one wants to talk to her in the scientific community anymore, because that's when the money stops, if you start telling the truth.
Yep. Same thing with the homeless industry. It's all an industry to continue a problem that funds this cottage industry around it, right? And if the main problem dries up, if climate change isn't real, well, then no more grants, no more research, no more anything like that, because it's not real. So, oh man, it's definitely real, and it's going to happen any day now. For real, it's going to happen any day. Be really scared. It's going to happen any day now. And they continually try to maintain that cycle. Oh man, we were wrong 10 years ago, but this time it's definitely true. 1989, the AP was saying we have 10 years left. 10 years. 1999 happened and they said, we've got 10 years left. Then 2008 happened and they said, well, the banks have blown up and we've got 10 years left, right? It's every year, it's just around the corner. It's 2 weeks to flatten the curve because we're goldfish and we forget. That's why. It's wild. Let's talk about ghost contracting. Larry Brock says, the Trudeau Liberals have no idea who gave GC Strategies, the ArriveCAN middleman, $11 million to do no actual work on the app. Trudeau's ministers must root out the rot, stop the lies, and end the cover-ups on the $54 million ArriveCAN boondoggle. Here's Larry Brock. I like Larry Brock. I think that I saw a picture of him wearing high heels, though, and I thought, oh, man. Every time I've seen him with, like, in these settings, in professional settings where he's going after a witness, he's been nothing but a bulldog. And then I saw him in the high heels and I thought, come on. Maybe it was O'Toole's influence. Anyway, here we go.
I have an actual copy of the email that Mr. McDonald wrote on the 29th of October, 2022. Mr. McDonald says to you, you asked me for advice on the key question of why GC Strategies, but I also think we are all grappling with who selected GC Strategies. So at this point, despite you telling this committee about all of the information that you picked a technical direction, you were prepared, sir, to take the advice of Mr. McDonald to claim ignorance, that you weren't aware as to who directly chose GC Strategies, because you said that on 4 occasions in your previous testimony. You said it was part of my team, and you weren't able to identify with clarity that you are today, sir, with respect to the technical direction. So that concerns me. Mr. McDonald's email contains several suggested answers for the executives. As an example, I will start by saying that I was not personally familiar with GC Strategies during the time in question, the document states, although it's unclear which executive would be expected to deliver that line. The email also predicts some of the questions they will be asked. If pressed, come on, we want some accountability here. Who decided? How did this company get a contract for almost $9 million? Who made money off of this? Who is getting rich off of taxpayer dollars, the document states, followed by a recommended response. Mr. Chair, I stand by my statement that I don't believe there was a single person, and I'm not actually aware of any rules being broken or wrongdoing. This is not how we operate at the CBSA. This exchange, this email with coaching on what to say and anticipated questions by committee is so disturbing on so many levels, sir. It's akin to obstructing justice. My former career as a Crown attorney would elicit a police investigation if this type of evidence came out with respect to a trial or a hearing. Parliament is a little different, but it's still disturbing to me, sir, on many, many levels that you sought coaching on specifically what to say and to not accept responsibility for GC Strategies. Have you been coached today, sir, on what to say and what not to say?
Thank you for the question. I have not been coached today on what to say.
I don't know how you could believe anything he says. Holy smoke. Here's Michael Barrett. He says, breaking, ethics commissioner. Where did we get an ethics? When did we get an ethics commissioner? Apparently we have an interim one. Whose brother-in-law is this guy? Okay. Somebody was saying Freeland's uncle. It's not Freeland's uncle. Ethics commissioner launches investigation into Trudeau's appointed chair of the billion-dollar Green Slush Fund. Trudeau's chair funneled over $200,000 of taxpayer money to a company where she is the CEO. Another Liberal under investigation for breaking ethics laws. This is not ethical? What do you mean this is not ethical? I just want to show you the Wikipedia page as of today. It says, the Office of Commissioner is currently vacant. The last commissioner was Martini Richard, having served for several weeks in the spring of 23 before resigning. Mary Dawson from 2007 to 2018, and Mario Dion from 2018 to 2023. So that's all very interesting. The interim conflict of interest and ethics commissioner is Honorable Conrad von Finkenstein. So, I mean, that's a good name. If you've got to have a name, that's a pretty good name. Conrad von Finkenstein. here's Andy Lee. And Melanie Joly wants to censor your speech. She really wants to censor your speech. And she says, citizens need a shared set of facts to make informed choices and to hold governments to account. With Neil Moran, we discussed this and the need to combat the spread of disinformation. I also shared progress Canada has made with global, what does she say here? Global Declaration on Information Integrity. What nonsense. And Andy Lee responds to this. She says, this need for a shared set of facts is coming from our Minister of Foreign Affairs, who neglected to mention that she met with controversial Trudeau Foundation donor Zhang Bin in 2018 in Beijing after we were promised there was no influence. Shared set of facts is more like facts we like instead of facts we don't like. Here's Holly Doan, and she says, Budget Office says spending on consultants up 16%, despite Cabinet's promise to curb the practice. Proposed authorities for professional and special services are at a record $21.6 billion. That's B with a B. This amount will likely increase. And we don't know what we're doing, so we need more consultants here, obviously. The Globe and Mail says, from contracts to criminal law, justice delayed is justice denied. And what about the Coots for? How can we have a situation where they're in remand, they're in like overnight jail that is not designed for long-term housing of prisoners for an extended period of time, years? How can we do that? And these people have the audacity to put this as a headline. I mean, it's not really a headline, a tweet, but and not mention it? Like, come on. Here's Danielle Smith. She's talking about Starlink. She says Alberta is starting a pilot project with Starlink in 3 rural communities to help connect more homes to high-speed internet. And here is the Ontario announcement. So I think that's a good move because it's cheap. It's cheap and it'll work. And I know that because the market has said it's cheap and it'll work. And it will. Here's the Government of Canada. This is May 3rd, 2022, so not that long ago. Starlink was definitely available. I've seen those ads, although Elon had not yet bought Twitter, I don't think. And anyway, Government of Canada invests $5.3 million to bring high-speed internet access to 1,662 households in Ontario, okay? And let's just do some quick math here, everyone. I love math. Math is really, really cool. 5.3 million is 5,300,000, right? 5,300,000. There you go. Divided by 1,662 customers, that's $3,188.92 per customer. Starlink, by comparison, is $499 for the hardware per customer. Okay, $499. And I've seen $199 on the deals. But even if we go with the $499, if the government had gone with Starlink last year, how much money would they have saved? $499 times 1662, which is the same number of customers they've connected, is $829,338. That's a lot less than $5.3 million. $5.3 million. Holy cow, right? Like, that's a lot of money. The savings would have been $4,470,000. I'm failing at reading this number terribly. Holy smoke. $4,470,662. So that's a lot of savings, right? That's a lot of savings. What do you think we could have done with money like that? I don't know. Yesterday, I read a tweet, and the tweet said Pierre Poilievre wanted to jail people for anti-Semitic statements. And I went off on that a little bit, saying that's really wrong. We shouldn't do that. And then the video that I played of Pierre Poilievre didn't have him saying that. And he said something about anti-Semitic statements, but he was certainly not calling for arresting people for anti-Semitic statements. So I wanted to make that clear. Apologies for misrepresenting what Mr. Poilievre said. Here he is throwing apples at the audience for shouting out things like freedom. And it's an interesting thing. The crowd is big, and he's going to be in Kitchener today. I got a call yesterday saying, come to our event in Kitchener. I'm busy. I can't go to the event tonight, but if you're interested in Kitchener, he is there. Here is Mr. Poilievre talking to a crowd.
And it's time for the NDP in this province to end the vaccine mandate so the nurses can go back. Yeah. That was his idea. He gets an apple for that. There you go. Good catch. Thank you. We have a private member's bill in the House of Commons, in fact, that would have banned all federal COVID mandates from returning. I'm disappointed to tell you that every single NDP member of Parliament voted to keep the mandates in place. Even now. Remember that the next time you're in an emergency room and you can't see a doctor or nurse. Remember that your NDP member of Parliament voted against allowing people to work as doctors and nurses for a simple personal medical decision. This is outrageous.
So he's out in BC and he's talking about, things that are going on with BC, and people are showing up. So I think that the die has been cast at this point in time, and he's got the momentum, and it's just a matter of time before an election gets called, and it's going to be, I think, his election to lose. Obviously, I think he's polling very high with the seats, and Trudeau is tanking, and the response is subpar, to say the least, from Trudeau. So that's interesting. Hello everyone, thanks very much for watching. This is just a short version of a longer show. If you'd like to get the whole show, you can go over to CanadaPoly.com and sign up for a subscription. Just look in the drop-down tab for Shop and Donate and look for subscriptions, and you'll get immediate access to the full show. Love to see you. Thanks for watching, everybody. Have a wonderful, wonderful day.